told that we have Senator Rand Paul.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. Obviously, a whole bunch going on in the world right now, and I want to preface all of what we're going to do because it's mostly going to be about Syria and some of the international stuff that's happening. Is that years ago, before I supported Donald Trump, but I was kind of coming around. One of the reasons that I got there is that you, who are really the standard bearer of libertarianism in the government right now, you were coming around on Donald Trump. I think as it relates partly to his foreign policy, and that was one of the things that got me there. So let me start with a quote from the Daily Wire just to catch everybody up, and then we'll get your take on what's going on in Syria. On November 30th, Islamic terrorist groups, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, launched a rapid offensive capturing Aleppo, Syria's second largest city. By December 5th, these forces had also taken control of Hama, the country's fourth largest city. The swift territorial losses prompted the Assad regime to seek support from allies. Iran pledged assistance to the Syrian government following the fall of Aleppo. By December 7th, rebel forces had entered Damascus, leading to the collapse of the Assad regime. President Bashar al-Assad fled to Moscow, where he was granted asylum. President-elect Donald Trump responded to the downfall of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's regime on Sunday, suggesting that Russia lost a key ally in the Middle East because of its war in Ukraine. Russia and Iran are in a weakened state right now, one because of Ukraine and a bad economy, the other because of Israel and its fighting success, he continued. Likewise, Ukraine President Zelensky and Ukraine would like to make a deal and stop the madness. They have ridiculously lost 400,000 soldiers and many more civilians. There should be an immediate ceasefire and negotiations should begin. Too many lives are being so needlessly wasted, too many families destroyed, and if it keeps going, it can turn into something much bigger and far worse. I know Vladimir Zelensky well. This is the time to act. China can help. The world is waiting, Trump said. Syria is a mess, but it is our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it, Trump said in a post on X. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. And you know what? We'll just come back to you right here. I don't need to read anymore. Senator, I sense you agree with the sentiment there that we are in way too deep in too many of these conflicts. We have no idea where the money is going all over the place, and that as it pertains to Syria particularly, we don't even know who the good guys are to some extent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with President Trump more. I think that this is not our fight. I think it's a crazy notion to even have 900 U.S. troops there. We have them scattered in a half dozen locations. There's barely more than 100 soldiers in one location. I think they're more of a target than they are deterrence. I think they're a tripwire. I think they could get us more heavily involved in a very messy situation where it's unclear who the good guys are. The people who have taken over the government were recently called al-Nusra, and before that they were called al-Qaeda. Mm-hmm. So these were people who are jihadist, intolerant of other religions. They've been heavily backed by the Turks. They probably have made this quick advance with the Turkish help. And so there's a question. Are there still several 100,000 Christians in Syria? Are they going to be intolerant? Are they going to be expelled from the country? Are they going to be treated as second-class citizens? Will the fighting go on? Will there still be Iranian proxies? Will there be Syrian Kurds? Now, the one enemy we do know that the Turks hate the worst are the Syrian Kurds.
Yeah.
Who's it that we fought with when we were fighting against the Assad regime and others? We were fighting alongside the Syrian Kurds, giving them weapons and billions of dollars. So it is a very confusing situation, and I think people should be very hesitant to get us involved. I think the thing we should do firsthand is remove the 900 troops from Syria because they're not of any value in deterring any attacks.
Do you think we have any responsibility to the Syrian Kurds or any of the other Christians or minorities that are there in that we've been there? As you just mentioned, we were helping the Kurds fight. Turkey obviously is not happy with the Kurds and have been trying to stop them from getting a state forever. In that we were involved, do we have any responsibility whatsoever?
There's no constitutional authority for us to be there. If Congress wants to vote, the majority of Congress to go to war in Syria, first they'd have to decide who are we going to fight. Mm-hmm. Is there a constitutional role for us to be involved with the domestic policing of another country? There just isn't. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have sympathy. I have a great deal of sympathy. In fact, I think that the Syrian Christians are in danger from this new group, frankly. One of the things about Assad, even though nobody liked Assad, myself included, was he did protect the Christians. That's why it's difficult determining Middle Eastern politics and who you support and what you want. And sometimes it's be careful of what you want, you might get it. Assad's going to be gone, but he did protect the Christians. Wasn't a free country, but he did protect the Christians. And now with him gone, you have jihadists who have been closely aligned with al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, with this Islamic movement that is one of intolerance towards other religions. They're also heavily backed by the Turks, who hate the Syrian Kurds, who used to be our allies also. It's a situation, it's just not our fight. There is no winning situation. But I don't want it to be taken as, I have no sympathy for the Syrian Christians or for the Syrian Kurds. You can have sympathy without believing that we have enough money or constitutional authority to be the world's policeman.
Today's show is sponsored by Aura, the all-in-one app designed to protect your personal information and keep you safe online. Let me start with a question. How many spam calls and texts do you get in a day? Spam calls are annoying, but the real issue is even bigger. Hackers recently stole 2.9 billion records from national public data. These records include names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, and worst of all, social security numbers. Some of this data has even been released online for free. If you're not taking steps to protect your personal information, now's the time to start. That's why I'm grateful for Aura. Aura monitors your personal data across billions of data points, including the dark web and public records, to alert you to potential identity theft. They don't just stop there. They also work to reduce spam calls and protect your sensitive information from being misused. And in the case of the worst, Aura provides up to $5 million in identity theft insurance to give you peace of mind. Protect your online security with Aura today. You can try Aura for free for 14 days at aura.com/Rubin. Once again, that's aura.com/Rubin. Don't wait. Your peace of mind is worth it. So I want to throw to a quick video of Donald Trump yesterday, basically echoing what you were saying right there.
So Taliban is our enemy. ISIS is our enemy. We have an area that I brought up with our generals 4 or 5 weeks ago, where Taliban is here, ISIS is here, and they're fighting each other. I said, why don't you let them fight? Why are we getting in the middle of it? I said, let them fight. They're both our enemies. Let them fight. Sir, we want to do it. They go in and they end up fighting both of them. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I think I would have been a good general, but who knows?
Sorry, quick correction. People know I love making corrections as they happen. We snagged that video yesterday. That was obviously from when Donald Trump was president. But does that right there, the fact that he's basically saying what you just said years ago, it just so deeply is contrasted with everything that this administration has done as far as foreign policy?
Well, when your enemies are fighting, you have two different enemies. Instead of choosing one that might be a lesser enemy and siding with them, some people are of the opinion, buy popcorn, watch them kill each other, but there's no dog in the fight. There's just no reason for us to be involved with that. And I think that's what Donald Trump was saying, and I think that's what he believes. I think of all the presidents in my lifetime, I haven't seen any more than Donald Trump believe in less intervention overseas and support a policy that I can support wholeheartedly. But we need to follow through with it. I mean, the last time he tried to remove those troops in Syria, they've been there since he was president. The last time he tried to move them, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and these other military hawks tried to forbid him from doing it. Sort of the opposite of what the Constitution says. The Constitution says Congress declares war, but once war is declared, the president executes the war plan, which means where you have the troops. They actually wanted to change the law to say he actually had to ask Congress for permission to move troops around. This is the opposite of what our founding fathers intended. But I'm hopeful that when Donald Trump comes in, the troops will be removed from Syria. They have no value there. They are a target, and they are a potential tripwire to drawing us into a messy civil war with no clear heroes.
Let's stick with that hopefulness for a moment, because I've been quite pleased with the picks so far and the nominees, and I sense that Trump really has learned some of these lessons. Can you give us some maybe insider take on what you think about the picks and the direction? And do you really think that Donald Trump learned some of the lessons as how deep the deep state is and some of the mistakes that he may have made?
I can only hope so. Time will tell. I do believe that in the first administration, I warned him repeatedly about John Bolton, who had terrible foreign policy views and was a war hawk wanting to be involved everywhere around the world. I warned them repeatedly, and he still picked him. despite my objections. And he turned out to be disloyal. He turned out to be a never-Trumper. And he turned out to be a disaster on foreign policy. I'm hoping that won't happen with this foreign policy team. Time will tell. But I do have some disagreements with them. While they don't want to be heavily involved in the Middle East, some of them want to expand the military budget to a great degree and become involved in a belligerent way with China. I think that's a huge mistake, and I think that trading with China is a much better option than fighting with China. And so I don't really like some of the bellicosity I hear from the incoming administration about severing ties with China. I think that actually makes war more likely with China if we sever our trading ties.
Let me ask you about something that I'm 99% sure you're very happy about, which is the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, headed by Elon and Vivek. I mean, I feel like this is like if you could have done exactly what you wanted to do and start a new government institution, even though you don't want to expand government, this is what you would have done, and probably you're feeling pretty good about this thing, right?
Absolutely. I've been in contact with Vivek several times. I know him well, and we're giving them ideas. We have supplied them with over 2,000 pages of waste that we have culled through for the government and think could be removed. We love the idea of actually making government workers show up. I know that when Elon took over Twitter, he said you had to show up in person, and about a third of them quit. He then said you had to not only show up in person, but utilized in the first Trump administration. But if they utilize that and come to Congress and work with convincing some of the weaker knees up here, the bigger government Republicans, to go along with the cuts, we could cut a tremendous amount, but we need most of the Republican votes to stay together to be in favor of cutting spending.
What would you say to the people who are concerned about the people who are going to be fired? I think most certainly my audience, everyone's on board, slash the budget, let's get $2 trillion out, fire the people, okay, fine. But what at the human level, so thousands of government employees likely are losing their job in about 2 months from now. Do you have any concerns about that? Do you think they'll be picked up by the private sector? Does it really matter in a weird way, or is it just a pain point that we have to deal with?
I'm very concerned with the people whose wages are being garnished to pay for the federal government. I'm concerned about the guy who makes $40,000 a year working his butt off, and he lost $5,000 worth of purchasing power because our government is spending more than comes in. I'm worried about the debt destroying the currency. And the thing is there are lots and lots of jobs in the private sector. The private sector is booming. We have a dearth of workers, frankly. We're having trouble finding enough workers. And so there are a lot of jobs outside of the government. And I'm all for everyone to have a job. I think a job is a great thing to have. But we don't need to have a government that spends $2 trillion more than it comes in. And we also need to be people to show up for work. One of my favorite stories was a few years ago, we had a guy at the EPA. He was assistant EPA, right number 2 spot at the EPA. And they noticed he was not in his office very much. And sometimes would be gone for 6 months at a time. And they asked him where he was. And they said, well, I also work for the CIA. And they said, really? The EPA and the CIA? He says, yeah, I'm on secret missions a lot. So we had a shutdown. And someone actually said, hey, let's call the CIA and make sure he actually works for the CIA. They'd never heard of him. So he did this for 10 years. He stole millions of dollars from the taxpayer. If that's one example, do you think we might not have some other examples of people who are spending their days at the casino or at the racetrack because they can't be bothered to come in? Every one of them should come in. Every one of them should be monitored. Every one of them should have to prove they did some work. And if they didn't, they should be let go.
You're giving me the perfect segue. I want to just throw to one other clip with you. This is tech guru Joe Lonsdale. He was subbing in as a co-host on the All In podcast, talking about what we have to do in 25 to bring back government accountability and efficiency.
Well, listen, Jake, I do agree. I think almost all reasonable Americans can see that our growth is ridiculously constrained. And I think Jeff Bezos was saying yesterday, like, we need a growth-oriented mindset if we're going to get out of our debt problems, out of our deficit problems. So it's nice to see everyone kind of coming on the team and saying, yeah, we need to fix these things. I think what people don't understand is like just how broken the government bureaucracies and regulations are, right? It's not like they're kind of sort of bad. Like it's almost like they're companies that went bankrupt. Like think of the worst company you know in Silicon Valley that went bankrupt like 30 years ago. And imagine if someone just like kept pumping money into that worst company you know over like 30 years to keep hiring people.
So like Yahoo or AOL, like some legacy company.
It was failing and take the worst department there, and then like the worst department gets the most money. So it's like it's like more, I guess you can use the word now, it's more than anything you've seen in a long time. And so there's really two things here. One, you got to take a chainsaw, as Elon Musk said, you got to take a chainsaw and just like cut a ton of broken stuff. But then day two is you got to say, how do we make this not stupid in the future? And there's things like maybe you bring back tests, maybe you bring accountability. The thing I'm most passionate about is, right now there's over 1 million rules at the federal level. It's stuff that everyone disagrees on. You can be the most left person trying to build like solar or wind or whatever, and you're like, what? I have to do what study over how many years? This makes no sense. So we gotta take these regulations and not only cut them, but we gotta make a data-driven system that forces regulations to defend themselves. And that way, instead of having a cancer that just grows forever out of control, you could actually have a process that like naturally trims things, naturally makes things fight for himself, and that way it doesn't get as dumb ever again.
Senator, I feel like you must love hearing that. People who actually build things, titans of industry, talking about why regulation is stifling everybody. And it seems to me that there is going to be a resurgence. I think we have an American Renaissance on the way, but I think the ideas of libertarianism and classical liberalism, the idea that the government should get off your back and that we don't need all of this hyper control, I think more and more people are getting on board that than certainly any other point in my lifetime.
Yeah, and if you look at efficiency, and you want to have efficiency in government, and you look at Elon Musk's career, one of the things he did at SpaceX is instead of getting contracts that were cost plus, they began having competitive contracts. And so with a cost plus contract, Boeing could have $1 billion contract and they get 10%. Mm-hmm. But if they have cost overruns and it's $2 billion, they get 10% of $2 billion. They get a bigger profit. And so getting rid of that and having competitive contracts will help a great deal. I think there's all kinds of things like that can happen through government, attrition of employees, firing of employees, but also sending money back, doing things for less money and sending the money back to Congress. And that's the rescission process, and a simple majority of Republicans could remove that spending. That is something I think we should work hard to do.
Senator, as always, I thank you for your time. As one of the few people in government that is actually doing an efficient job, what do you do for the rest of today? What do you do on this Tuesday?
Cutting spending. I'm leaving here and have a big pair of scissors to cut some coupons, cut some spending, get rid of some waste and graft. There's plenty to do.
All right. Well, I thank you for your time, and let's do this in person around inauguration. We're going to be in D.C. for a couple days.
Sounds good.